In Turkey, vote counting continues after an election day with a high voter turnout. Unofficial polls show Recep Tayyip Erdogan leads the race for the presidency. In Palestine, the Israeli regime violated the ceasefire by resuming attacks against the Gaza Strip. And in Senegal, citizens took to the streets to demonstrate against President Macky Sall's intention to run for a third term in office. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the TeleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In Turkey, with more than 80% of participation, the electoral day closed. The more than 50,000 polling stations set up for this day of presidential and parliamentary elections throughout the Eurasian country closed their doors at 5 p.m. local time to begin counting the votes. Preliminary non-official results show that so far, more than 70% of the votes have been counted. Recep Tayyip Erdogan leads the electoral race with more than 50% of the votes, followed by opposition candidate Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu with more than 40%. In the parliament elections also held today, Erdogan's party, the Justice and Development Party, leads the race with over 275 seats. If neither candidate secures more than 50% of the votes, a runoff elections will be held on May 28th. According to the electoral schedule, the first results are expected to be announced around midnight local time, while the official announcement will be made on Friday, May 19th. Turks lived their country's election day with enthusiasm and reaffirmed the importance of voting.
We are enthusiastic. The election campaign was strong. Neither side gave up their job. This is an election for a big change. I think this is going to be very positive for our country.
What is important in this election is not to divide Turkey. I hope it will continue like this. Everyone is trying to make a living. There is nothing else to do. We will do our duty.
President Erdogan made a statement on Twitter at the end of the voting process. On his account, the president said, "Dear fellow travelers and friends, the voting process has concluded throughout our country in a way consistent with our democracy, thanks to God. Now, as usual, it is time to hold on the ballot boxes. Until the results are final, we continue to protect the will of our nation." In other news, in the United Kingdom, workers at the 14 rail operators shut down to demand wage adjustments in line with inflation. Workers are carrying out the strike as a measure of strength after rejecting a 5% pay rise offer as insufficient, and claim they will continue their movement until the government unblocks their pay dispute on the second consecutive day of cancellations of hundreds of journeys in the UK hinterland. The Rail Delivery Group has called on passengers to plan their journeys before they travel because there will be few train services. In recent months, different sectors such as doctors, nurses, and postal workers have gone on strike to demand higher wages due to the rising cost of living, as the British year-on-year inflation stands at 10.1%. The G7 plans to launch a partnership plan to diversify supply chains to reduce dependence on trade with China, following talks with G7 finance chiefs in the coastal city of Niigata. Japanese Finance Minister Junichi Suzuki said that during the pandemic there were problems with supply chains being too concentrated in one place. Suzuki added that lower middle-income countries could take on a bigger role and benefit from this. Although the ministers did not directly mention reducing their relations with China and Russia, they focused on a new framework for clean energy relations. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen noted the recent disruptions in the global economy and the importance of diversified and resilient supply chains. At the end of the financial negotiations on Saturday, the ministers reaffirmed their commitment to the sanctions against Russia and affirmed that they are working together to enforce them, but did not announce any new concrete measures to address sanctions evasion. Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at TeleSUR English, where you will find news updates, and much more. Other stories coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back from the south. The Israeli government violated the ceasefire by resuming attacks against the Gaza Strip. The attack took place a few hours after Egypt had managed to mediate a ceasefire pact between Israel and Palestine on Saturday. The Israeli armed forces claimed their defenses just counterattacked two alleged Palestinian aggressions, according to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office. Although Tel Aviv signed the truce, it would respond if threatened. Local media reported that after the signing of the agreement, Palestinians took to the streets to celebrate the victory of the resistance, which succeeded in making the Zionist regime negotiate the ceasefire. Now there is a tense calm between the parties after the violation of the temporary peace reached by Egypt. In Palestine, also more than 100 buildings have been destroyed in the Gaza Strip in 6 days of military aggression by Israeli forces. Occupation warplanes hit on Saturday a number of Palestinian homes in north central and south Gaza. Local media reported that residential buildings have been completely destroyed, while some 940 homes and some 49 properties have suffered major damage throughout the Strip, but mainly in Gaza. Hundreds of Palestinians surveyed the damage to their homes. On Sunday, after a ceasefire was established between the Israel and militant fighters, for most of them it was impossible to recognize their homes as many were completely destroyed. Sifting through the rubble, they tried to collect what was retrievable and found it almost impossible to do so.
When I arrived in the morning and saw my house, I was shocked, stunned. I couldn't find any of the features of the house. The house was destroyed, my furniture, the bed, my children's clothes and books, our lives. I found nothing to live with, nothing to live for. I don't know how I will build the house again. I have been building the house stone by stone for more than 15 years. I only finished building and started living in it 5 months ago. Now I came back to find it one with the ashes.
What truce? Now the truce is over, and we have returned to our home. Where will we stay? Our neighbors, where will they stay? The children in the schools lost their books. My nephews lost their books. What are they going to do? And they say go back to school. How am I going to teach them? If there's no uniform for them to wear, what do I do? Does anyone have money to buy them books and clothes again? I don't know what to say. What truce? The truce after the destruction.
In Russia, the defense ministry denounced the use by Ukrainian forces of long-range missiles against civilian targets in the Donbas region. The missiles were provided to Ukraine by the United Kingdom, which was the first country to deliver this type of projectile.
On 12 May, at around 6 p.m. Moscow time, Ukrainian Air Force combat aircraft carried out a missile strike on the polymer product company Polypack and the meat processing plant Milan in the city of Luhansk. Storm Shadow air-to-air missiles supplied to the Kiev regime by Great Britain were used for the strike, despite London's declaration that these weapons would not be used against civilian targets. As a result of the strike, a fire broke out on the territory of Luhansk's food and chemical industry factories. There is damage to nearby residential buildings. Civilians were injured, including 6 children.
On Sunday, Sudan's warring parties were to resume talks in the port city of Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The aim is to create plans to deliver humanitarian aid and withdraw forces from civilian areas. Sudanese authorities announced the readiness of Khartoum and Wadi Setna airports, as well as Port Sudan's harbor to receive humanitarian assistance. On the other hand, the Sudanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs condemned the holding of a special session of the Human Rights Council, where it discussed the exceptional circumstances in that African nation. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry said the protection and development of human rights in Sudan is a national issue of great importance and is at the top of the state's priority. For the last month, the army and the rapid support forces have been fighting fierce battles, leaving over 750 people dead, more than 5,000 injured, and over 900,000 displaced. We have more news coming up after a very short break. Welcome back from the south. In Senegal, citizens took to the streets to demonstrate their rejection of President Macky Sall's refusal to rule out seeking a third term in office. Groups of citizens mobilized on the streets of Dakar, the country's capital, in response to a call for demonstrations carried out by a group called Movement of Senegal's Living Forces (F24), referring to the election date scheduled for February 24, 2024. Demonstrators expressed their rejection of Sall's refusal to rule out running for a third term as president, a measure they claim would be unconstitutional. In this sense, they asked him to leave power while demanding the release of over 300 political prisoners. In Sao Paulo, at least 50,000 people are homeless, and the conservative mayor's office is carrying out repressive policies against this sector of the population. In response, homeless people and human rights organizations protested in front of the city hall. Our correspondent Ignacio Lemos was there with the details.
Winter is coming, and Sao Paulo's mayor's office, led by conservative Ricardo Nunes, is not providing solutions to the city's housing crisis. Quite the contrary.
They are taking away the floats. They are taking away the tents of the homeless people, taking away their documents, clothes, medicines. There is an extreme violence and elimination process. On top of that, the governor of the state of Sao Paulo wanted to take the population to the countryside to work on fields, which will be slave labor.
With record cash on hand, the mayor's office of the capital, with the country's largest gross domestic product, cut back on long-standing initiatives to protect the vulnerable population on the streets.
What Bolsonaro and his supporters left behind were people on the streets, going hungry, freezing to death, people with no rights, education, culture, or housing. So we are in a very vulnerable situation, and the city hall is not solving it. I filed a protocol with the Public Prosecutor's Office about the city hall closing a tent downtown during the low-temperature operation.
Official numbers from Sao Paulo warn about a crisis with 50,000 people living on the streets, but human rights organizations claim that real numbers might be even more shocking.
Mayor Ricardo Nunes is destroying the social assistance service and has put in place a policy of removing the tents from the homeless population, and that will generate a gigantic level of barbarism. We know that the cold period will start now in the city. The tents help people not to die frozen on the streets, and what can happen is a tragedy much worse than in the last few years with the cold wave that we will have in the middle of the year.
After marching from the city hall to the municipal chamber, hundreds of homeless people, communities, and human rights organizations were left waiting for urgent solutions for the vulnerable population on the streets of Sao Paulo.
Ignacio Lemos y Julia Nassif para TeleSUR.
In Brazil, the landless rural workers movement celebrates the third day of the National Agrarian Reform Fair. The activity promotes the importance of land distribution to ensure people's food security. This is the main event of dialogue between the landless rural workers movement and the population of the cities in Brazil. It takes place in the Whitewater Park in the city of Sao Paulo. It was inaugurated on Thursday, May 11th, after 5 years, and is attended by around 1,200 vendors with 500 tons of food grown in settlements and camps in 23 Brazilian states. The meeting marks the beginning of the celebrations for the 40th anniversary of the Landless Rural Workers Movement, which was founded in January 1984. It is a way of presenting society and not only the agrarian reform model defended by the organization, but also that which it produces in practice and whose architects run the risk of being evicted. And before coming to an end, let's quickly review results that are out in Turkey's general elections. These are non-official figures provided by polling agencies. Also bear in mind these are early results. This number might very well change as counting continues. So far, Recep Tayyip Erdogan leads the electoral race with 50.68% of the votes, followed by opposition candidate Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu with 43.52%. As we said, voter turnout has been high. More than 80% of the electoral roll came out to vote. In parliament elections also held today, Erdogan's party, the Justice and Development Party, leads the race with over 275 seats. We have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. Also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.